Either.
Good job, Bob.
Okay. All right. So we're starting with the chart, all worldviews at the top, and then we have spiritual and non-spiritual. Obviously, I think at this point the non-spiritual is gaining on the spiritual. And then the first three on the left are what I call the God or faith-based. Those are the three Abrahamic religions, which are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we'll talk about all these as we go on. And then in the middle is the karma-based religions, which are the Eastern religions of Hinduism and Buddhism. And then the New Age, I call it New Age because those are probably in the last 100 years, secular humanism, naturalism, and spiritual atheism. And we'll talk about most of those today, but the naturalism, I think we'll get to next week. And then on the far right is the non-spiritual, which I call it free will based. It's everybody does their own thing. The key one there is existentialism. And what existentialism believes is all there is time, matter, and chance. Okay. Let me see if I got a slide for that. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about what is a worldview. It's your personal intellectual operating system. Just like on a computer, you have iOS or you have Microsoft, or there's a lot of specialty ones, SAP or whatever. That's the operating system that the computer software runs on. And I call your worldview your intellectual operating system. It underlies all your calculations, all your thoughts, and it's down there at the bottom. And you never really look at it until it crashes or something bad happens, and then you get to know it, right? So I think of a worldview as an intellectual operating system. Everybody has one, and it's important to try and understand how it affects your thinking, how your worldview affects your actions. And I say that your words say what you would like to believe or what you think you are, but your actions really tell who you really are and what your worldview really is. I mean, people say things that they believe, but based on their actions, you're not really seeing that. So basically, there's two kinds, the spiritual and the non-spiritual. The four things a worldview must answer, or generally answer. It doesn't, there's no must about this, but generally a worldview will talk about origin. How did everything start? Talk about meaning. What gives your life meaning? Talks about morality. What is right and wrong? And then last, some do and some don't. Some worldviews do, some don't. Talk about the future, or what gives you hope for the future. Again, last week we talked about this Gestalt shift, where two people can see different things in the same picture. So your worldview kind of is what decides what you see in that picture. I mean, we all look at the same thing, but your worldview can like change your idea of what's really the meaning there, or what's right and wrong in a certain situation. There's two parts to reality. Obviously, everybody here believes that there's a spiritual part. Today's education system, except for the good Christian schools like MVCA, don't talk a lot about that. And they teach about the physical laws only. But just like it's important to know, schools up until recently didn't teach how to balance a checkbook or personal finance or marriage or any of those kind of things. They really didn't help you do a lot of things you need to succeed in life. I believe our educational system currently just teaches about the physical laws, and there's really no mention about spiritual laws. But there is a spiritual side to reality. I say it's kind of like if an American many years ago went to Europe and they said, let's play football. It's a green grass and there's stripes on the field. The American would go out and throw the ball with its hands, tackle people, and that sort of thing. But the Europeans are like, no, that's not how you play football. They both call it football. It's both on a green field. So you can't win American football by European rules, and you can't win European football by American rules. So that's kind of like how your Gestalt shift switches your worldview. What I usually say is that most people in today's life, they're playing by the wrong rules. They don't understand all the rules. So you can't win. All you do is get frustrated. You don't know the rules. You're getting penalized. Things aren't going right. It's because you're playing the game by the wrong set of rules. So trying to understand reality without understanding spirituality, I believe, can only lead to stress, confusion, and frustration. Okay, so we'll start with existentialism, which is all you believe is there's time, matter, and chance. It's survival of the fittest. Their origin was the Big Bang, and it was Darwinism. Darwin gave the early existentialism the origin. They had in the beginning people that didn't believe in spirituality, which was very few back in the 1800s. When Darwin came along, he gave them the origin theory that they so badly needed, because before what he came up with, even though it's not true, that gave them an origin theory for their worldview. And we've talked about that a lot, and we talked about statistical chances, and we'll actually go into that a little more next week, talk about physical evidence of the spiritual part of existence. So 3 types of basic types of non-spiritual beliefs, worldviews. Existentialism, believe there's only time, matter, and chance. Your whole thing is create more pleasure, reduce pain. That's it. There's no meaning. There's no morality. It's just you. There's nothing precedes existence or after existence. Your whole life is just me. It's all about you, and create more pleasure than pain. Now, an agnostic is someone that's not sure and won't take a stand. Well, I'm not sure if there is spirituality or not, if there is a God or not. But, I don't really care. I'm not taking a stand. Can't prove either way. And then there's 2 types of atheists. Okay, an existentialism is definitely an atheist because they don't believe in God. But there are some people that believe in a spiritual side of things, but don't believe there's a God or that there's somebody controlling things. A deist is a person that what they call the wind up the clock theory. A deist is someone who believes that there was some sort of intelligent force that got things going. He just wound up the clock and it's going on its own right now. So that would be an atheist. They don't believe there's anybody that has omnipotence or omniscience, but they still believe there's a spiritual side of things. So there's really 2 types of atheists. An existentialist, and we're going to go into this more next week, believes that all meaning comes from existence alone. That's what existentialism means. There's nothing other than physical, nothing before the physical, nothing after, just time, matter, and chance. And a lot of people nowadays that are existentialists call themselves secular humanists, because that sounds real nice. It makes them sound pretty human and non-religious, but I'm human. So that's part of that seductive language I talked about last week. And existentialist believes there's only time, matter, and chance. There's no moral code. Do your own thing. There's no meaning. You just increase pleasure, decrease pain, and there's really no hope for the future. You just take it day by day, try and get as much pleasure as you can today. Agnosticism, a person who believes ultimate reality is unknown and probably not knowable. Person who's not committed to believing there is or is not a God, kind of whatever, go with the flow. As we talked about, there's 2 kinds of atheists. one that believes in there is a spiritual part of existence and one that doesn't. So what does spiritual mean? Okay, Webster's defines it as relating to or consisting of or affecting the spirit. The study of spirituality is simply the study of that which is other than the physical. And synonyms are immaterial, no bodily form. And part of my whole point of this thing is it's hard to describe spirituality. Everybody struggles with it. And as I said early on, we are born into a physical body. So the whole idea of spirituality is a difficult concept, and everybody struggles with it day in and day out. Like I said, there's a lot of people nowadays. The big thing is to say, well, I'm spiritual, but not religious. Okay, a lot of religions, like all big institutions, have become corrupt. Okay, the Catholic Church is a great example, and there, recently, the past few years, there's been all kinds of big time non-denominational pastors and preachers that have taken falls. Mars Hill went down. A lot of big time people went down because they get so big they become corrupt, and that's usually what takes them down. But so nowadays people don't want to be associated with a religion, so they just say I'm spiritual but not religious. Again, the most common example of what all these people believe is they talk about karma. Okay, and we'll get into that in just a second. But the karma is the idea of a spiritual force that is not godlike. It has no intention. It's not all knowing. It's not all encompassing. Some people just say the universe and God are identical. It becomes they come up with all sorts of explanations as to what karma is. So the question is, what the heck is karma? A lot of people say, well, if you do more good works than bad works, good things will happen. That's a nice concept. It's hard to argue with, but it's kind of shallow, right? What constitutes a good work, a bad work? And the other thing, it's popular today with a lot of people, and people say, well, it's a universal balancing force. What goes around comes around. Again, another kind of nice concept, but when you kind of dig into it, it's like, what are the rules? Who is the judge, and how do you know? The whole thing about karma, what I believe, and people say, well, karma, you can't touch it, you can't see it, it's not scientific. Well, that's why a lot of people don't believe in God to begin with. They say, well, you can't see it, you can't touch it, it's not scientific, it's not physical. Well, karma is pretty much the same thing, but they'll say, well, I believe in karma, but not God. Okay, well, what's the difference? And how does God relate to karma, or how does karma relate to God, is always a good question. And they say, well, there is no God, there's only karma. Okay, well, who's the judge? What are the rules? What does that mean exactly? And the other thing about this karma, and we'll get into it in Hinduism, is Hinduism supports the caste system because they believe in karma. What goes around comes around, and reincarnation. Everything is doing more good works than bad works. So if you're poor, or if you're handicapped, or if you're sick, karma says, well, you deserve that. That's because you did something wrong in a past life. So the whole idea of karma and the Hindu concept of reincarnation supports the caste system, and so you have millions of people in different castes supported by the religion. And the question is, can you have a relationship with karma? I think that might be difficult. Okay, and so again, karma is being saved by works. They believe the whole thing, and karma is kind of retroactive, Whereas what we've been studying about Jesus and talking about motivations and being proactive, they're totally opposites. Karma is if you do something wrong, you got to do, there's this scale. If you do something wrong, you have to do more good things than bad things to right the scales of justice, so to speak. Okay, there's no forgiveness, there's no grace, there's no mercy. It's all about works. You're saved by works. Justice is all about doing more good works than bad works. And I have an example. I talk about the car in the driveway. It's like if there's a 16-year-old kid or going on 16, and every day he comes to his parents and say, "Oh, can I have a car when I'm 16? Can I have a car? Well, when I get my license, can I have a car when I get my license?" He's driving his parents nuts, and then he turns 16, and the next day a car shows up in the driveway. So he goes to his next door neighbors and thanks them for the car. Well, karma is like thanking the wrong person for the car that your parents just bought you. Kind of, you don't know who to thank, so you're thanking the wrong person. And it also allows humans to be their own gods. The thing about karma is there's no responsibilities. Well, I'll just do more good works and bad works. I don't have to really do anything except some good works, and there's no real responsibility. So it's people that want the idea of justice, that they want a deep down sense of justice without really having to follow any real rules or discipline. The thing about Christianity is it is a disciplined religion. Islam is a very disciplined religion, that sort of thing. But what karma allows a lot of people to do is to believe in justice without discipline or without any real rules. That's why I believe people use the term karma instead of God. Okay, we're going to talk about Hinduism, we're going to talk about Buddhism, and we're going to talk about Islam, because those are the major. And I think if we cover those, since they all are all so different, that's pretty representative of all the religions. Excuse me. But the first question is, let's talk about the similarities. Well, Islam and Christianity are both, quote, Abrahamic religions. And generally, the Muslims believe that Jesus was a prophet. A lot of them believe that it was in the virgin birth. Almsgiving, the Buddhists believe in almsgiving. The Muslims believe in almsgiving, but it's like 2 or 3%. And Christians believe in almsgiving. So that the Hindus really don't have that concept. You just do more good works than bad works. And if you know what you did bad, you just, there's no real discipline of almsgiving other than, if you do something bad first. Buddhism is real big into mindfulness, which is a form of prayer. And same with Islam. I mean, the Muslims pray, 6 times a day, 4 times a day, something like that. So they're very prayerful and very disciplined on their prayer life. Hindus, I believe, India, I believe, is the most spiritual country in the world. When I started writing my book about Hinduism, I had a niece in India that was very highly educated, and I started talking to her about Hinduism and wanted her to review the book and all that, and which she did. And I had a few things wrong, but she read about existentialism, and she said, "Well, what's this existentialist thing?" I said, "It's people that don't believe in a spiritual part of reality." And she goes, "What's that? How does that work?" So this was a 20-some-year-old, highly educated, successful woman, and had never even heard of a non-spiritual worldview before. Because pretty much everybody in India is spiritual. You get in a taxi cab, and we'll get into this, they all worship a certain deity, okay? And they'll have the deity, kind of like the Saint Christopher on the front of their taxi, but everybody is like that. In terms of exclusive claims, Christianity has a lot of exclusive claims. Islam has a lot of exclusive claims. Buddhism has the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which are more or less exclusive claims. So most all religions have some sort of exclusive claims. And the other thing, when we describe these religions, especially Hinduism, Buddhism, or when we talk about the ancient gods, what we most Americans don't realize is, and this is a story about India. I went to India in 88, 92, and 97. And each time I went, there were no phones. There was absolutely no phones. There was one little hut downtown. They had one or two phones, and there's a long line. If you got in the line, waited, then they would pick up the phone just like the good old days, and they'd get an operator, and and then they'd say, well, this guy wants to call the US, or this guy wants to call London, or whatever. But in 97, we were at Posn's house, and a neighbor a couple miles away wanted to invite us to dinner. So a little boy, probably 13, 14-year-old, comes up on his bicycle. He doesn't speak English. He's got a little piece of paper that says, join me at my house for dinner at 6 o'clock. So we write on there, okay, see you then, hand it to him, and he rides away. That was in 1997. So there literally was no phones, and you don't realize how tough that is just on anything. The infrastructure was decaying. They would never have gotten that place wired for landlines, just because without communications, it's hard to do stuff on a long-term basis. People would show up at your house that you hadn't seen for years, and you welcome in, they stay for a little while, and they take off, and you say see you, you know, with no, you can't realize how difference that makes. And this was in 97, okay? And we already had cell phones and everything in the US, but then we went back in 2004, and everybody had a cell phone, taxi drivers, street vendors. It was like, boom. And that's when India really took off. But in terms of, if people say, well, Hinduism, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, Hinduism is this or Hinduism is that. But before 1948, after the war, when Israel, you know, the British Empire was basically restructured everything, India was like 27 different states with 27 different languages and no phones. So what is Hinduism in, you know, the southern part of India was way different than Hinduism in northern parts, and it was very tribal. And the same thing is true with Buddhism, or even when we talk about ancient gods. So if I've heard people say Hinduism is this or Hinduism is that, but having traveled throughout India a number of times, it's all very local and tribal. Up until after 2000, now they're trying to develop structure to Hinduism and all that, but it was as much a culture as it was a religion. Hinduism has no concept of conversion. Nobody either ever converts into or out of Hinduism. If you're born in India, you're a Hindu, pretty much, end of story. And they're super tolerant. You know, it's like, you believe what you believe, I believe what I believe. And then Hinduism is polytheistic in that everybody has a certain deity. There's a god of money, there's a god of kindness, there's thousands of gods, and each family kind of adopts one of those gods as their main god to worship. But to say that Hinduism means X, Y, or Z, or Buddhism means X, Y, or Z. The one thing I will say, though, that most of the Hindus I've talked to over the years will ultimately say, yeah, ultimately there's one God. So in that sense, they're kind of monotheistic. But there's, where is it? Yeah, there's no single source of authority. There's no identifiable founder. There's no prophecy, no theological system, no central religious organization, although they're trying to start that now. No single scripture, which alone is authoritative. no creed which regularly recites. It's kind of like pick your own God. You do your thing, I do my thing. If you do something wrong, better do some good works to make up for that. And ultimately, we're judged by our works, and if we did good, we come back at a higher form of life the next time. If you did bad, you're in trouble, because you'll probably come back as an animal or a lower caste person or something like that. That pretty much is
So how do you know if you do what you're doing is good or what you're doing is bad?
you just got to kind of have a sense. All right, so yeah, look, what the heck is going on there? So the Hinduism has epic stories, just like the Iliad and the Odyssey in Greek religions. There's the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana, which are epic stories about certain gods, which are very human-like, do good things, and certain gods do bad things. And then there's the Vedas and the Upanishads, which are all wise sayings. So, you know, they try and follow the Vedas. Some people study the Vedas, and I probably should have more examples of those, but it's all about following wise sayings and doing good things. And they have all kinds of Vedas that you can follow about what's good, bad, and you know, that sort of thing.
Do they have like a Bible?
No, yeah, there's no single source of authority. And again, it was so regional. Some people have read, there's a Bhagavad Gita is right there. There's the Mahabharata, and which is like an epic play and that sort of thing. So it's kind of pick what you want. It really, you know, and I've studied this for 30 years. It's kind of like pick what you want. So that's kind of what it is. One of the things says the entire universe is one divine entity who is simultaneously at one with the universe and who transcends it as well. All right, what's that mean? Hey, Debbie.
Yeah.
Can you turn your sound off?
Okay, sorry.
All right, no problem. So here's some things. Here's some things that they say. Humans are perceived as being trapped in samsara, which is a meaningless cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Karma is the accumulated sum of one's good and bad deeds. Karma determines how you will live your next life through pure acts, thoughts, and devotion. Through pure acts, thoughts, and devotion, one can be reborn at a higher level. Eventually, one can escape samsara and achieve enlightenment. Bad deeds can cause a person to be reborn at a lower level. The unequal distribution of wealth, prestige, suffering are thus seen as the natural consequences for one's previous acts, both in this life and the next. Meditation is often practiced, with yoga being the most common. Other activities include daily devotions, rituals, and a puja, which is they burn a fire and they sit around and chant. Hinduism has a deserved reputation of being highly tolerant. You know what? There's a Hindu guy across the street, Indian guy, wonderful, gentle, good-natured man. And he's read my book and we talked about it. And I said, ultimately, Sam, I said, do you believe Jesus was crucified and resurrected? And his response was, I have no reason not to. Okay, so they're very super tolerant. Very, you know, it's kind of like, if I do my thing and if I do good acts, I'll be fine. You know, and they're not real judgmental about spiritual things. And, you know, ultimately say the truth is one. but different sages call it by different things. So ultimately, they all kind of have this sense that there is one God at the end of the chain. The Vedas are the ancient scriptures. They manifest the divine word in human speech. There's 4 Vedas consisting of 4 parts. The primary portion is the mantra or hymn section, and there, okay, to this are appended ritualistic teachings, theological sections, what's good and what's bad, and finally philosophical sections. And before a wedding, or before or after a birth, or before somebody, after somebody gets engaged, all the ladies will get together, and I've seen them just chant, ritual chants for an hour. I mean, they're very prayerful. They have their chants, which are kind of repeating, like kind of Hare Krishna, which is praise Krishna, who's one of their gods, and stuff like that. So it's wide open. That's about the best thing I can say. Ultimately, there's one God, many gods to choose from. Choose the deity that you like. It is, I find it very similar to Roman mythology. The gods, there's all kinds of gods. Some are warlike, some are whimsical, some are human, some are part human and part man. And the other thing is, the one thing, if you're talking to a Hindu, you can say, how many chances do you think you get at this life? And they'll say, you keep going till you get better. So that if you're looking for some fundamental differences, that's the one that is the most, because anything else you say, like, with Jesus crucified, they'll say, well, I'm good with that. I believe that's possible, or something like that. But the big difference is, well, one, you're saved by works, not faith. They don't have that concept of being saved by faith. And really, forgiveness, a lot of them just don't have that concept of forgiveness. If you do something wrong, you got to get it together, and you got to do some more good things. You should know better than to do something wrong, whatever that is. But 2, you got to get to work, make up for that. Or
if somebody does something wrong to them, well, karma will take care of them.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I call it, best I can do to say it, justice without discipline, or without having to follow anybody else's rules. You kind of do your own thing. I wish I could give you a better example, but that's I just got to beat around the bush. Okay, so now Buddha was born into a Hindu family in India. Okay, a very wealthy Hindu family. He was raised as a prince in a in a very nice situation. Never went outside, or never was exposed to anything unpleasant. But he got weary of just the palace life, and he wanted to see what was outside. And he ventured out, and the first time he was aware of the ravages of old age, sickness, death, and suffering. He was just taken aback at all the suffering that there was out there. So he became somewhat obsessed with trying to understand, why is there suffering, and how do you deal with it? So at the age of 29, he left the kingdom to seek enlightenment. He sat under a bush, and after a while, years of studying, sat under a tree, and vowed not to rise until he discovered the truth about life and death. And they believe that through, meditation and just thinking about your life, that you will gain enlightenment, which there's something to that. But The Buddhist discovery cannot adequately be described as a religion, a philosophy, or a psychology. It's like a way of life. And the whole thing is, he was shocked by the suffering, and he was trying to deal with the suffering. And we'll get into this. Ultimately, what he said is you have to escape from the material world. It's the material world, the physical world, that causes suffering. And the idea is to escape from the material world to avoid the suffering. And he became popular throughout all of Southeast Asia and into Thailand and into China. But again, it's karma based, okay? That has no deities. The big thing about Buddhism is it's non-theistic. They don't believe in God at all. They don't have any deities. It's just like it's the natural universe. It's the natural force. You're just one with the force, so to speak. And that's why the secular humanists and most of the trendy people these days like Buddhism, because again, there's no real rules, there's no discipline. It's just this, idyllic idea that, there is justice in the world. And if I can escape from the craziness of the material world, I'll be fine. I just have to get my mind together and do well, and I'll be fine. And Buddhists don't worship Buddha. Buddhists are spiritual, but they don't believe in a specific god or gods. Basic ideas, materialism leads to suffering, so you have to escape materialism. And then what happened is, so when you believe that, then you got to start setting people like, well, give me something, I need some rules here. So he started off with 4 noble truths, which are that this is Buddha came up with 4 noble truths. There is suffering, there is a cause of suffering, there's an end to suffering, and the way out is the Eightfold Path. So you go from 4 laws, which are basically 1, there's suffering, and then you get to 8, that you have to have the right view. You have to have the right intention, to have right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort. So it's like, well, it's all kind of out there, and you just got to kind of do what you think is right. Okay, there's no real God, there's no real rules, there's no discipline, there's no structure, but you'll know what's right when you do it. So our mind is like a field, and performing action is like sowing seeds in that field. Positive, virtuous actions sow the seeds of future happiness, and negative or non-virtuous actions sow the seeds of future suffering. Again, this is the idea of karma, and if you do more good works than bad works, you'll be okay. The definite relationship between actions and their effects, that virtue causing happiness and non-virtue causing suffering, is known as the law of karma. Okay. So again, it's all works. Ultimately, nirvana for the Buddhists, the goal is to escape the material world through meditation and good works. Nirvana is a Sanskrit word, which is the language of India. For the goal of the Buddhist path is enlightenment or awakening. It means extinction or cessation. You have to cease from your material wants, and you have to separate yourself from your material urges, and extinction from greed, ill will, and delusion of the mind. Those are the 3 poisons that perpetuate suffering: greed, ill will, and delusions of the mind. Nirvana is what the Buddhists achieved on the night, was what Buddha achieved on the night of his enlightenment. He became completely free from these 3 poisons, and everything he taught the rest of his life was aimed at helping others to arrive at that freedom. So it's pretty simple. Sit there under a tree and think for a while, and suddenly you'll be able to escape from materialism. Yes.
So in Buddhist societies, are they generally assume there's low crime and not a whole lot of ill will against mankind?
That's the idea. Yeah. But so would you say, in Christian culture in the 1800s, Christianity was, even believed in forgiveness and mercy, but you think there was low ill will, or, but it's an idea, it's ideals, it's people trying to achieve an ideal and a concept to escape from the materialism. Whereas, we'll get into this, Christianity is very worldly based. He said, I'm live in this world, but I'm not of this world. So whereas the Buddhists are trying to escape, you get away, you meditate, clear your mind, and your butt will follow, as they say, right? So then we come to Islam. So the religion is called Islam. The followers are called Muslims. The word Islam means submission to the will of God. Muhammad is considered to be the ultimate prophet. Jesus is considered to be a prophet. Moses is a prophet. They were all descendants of Abraham. Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael, who was one of Abraham's first son. And both Christians and Jewish scriptures and religions were known in the region where Muhammad lived, which was Medina and Mecca. And it was a big trade route. And he was born in 600 AD. So Christianity and the Jewish traditions were very well established all around. Especially because Arabia, where he was from, is kind of south part of the Arab world now, but they were big trade routes, and it was well known. So he was born in 570 AD into an Arabian tribe that controlled the import trade, the city of Mecca. Many people call this the beginning of the Dark Ages. And the big thing then was the Kaaba stone, which was in Mecca. It was this big stone that everybody was required to come to once a year and worship that stone. So obviously it was a big tourist attraction, and a lot of the religious leaders made their money from people coming to worship this stone. At the age of 40, in one of these pilgrimages, Muhammad alleged that the angel Gabriel had given him his first revelation about the one single God. So that is, obviously it's a monotheistic, comes from the Abrahamic tradition, which is monotheism. It's the only monotheistic real tradition. This revelation gave insights that later became the Quran. And people spell the Quran very differently. Some is Koran. This one right here is Quran. And it's interesting that Muhammad didn't even believe he was a prophet to begin with, but as he talked about what he heard the angel tell him, people began to say, well, you should put that in a book, and maybe that's God, the angel's talking to you. But at the time, monotheism wasn't a big idea in that part of the world, the southern Mideast. So he started talking about these things in Mecca, but he got kicked out basically because the religious fathers said, this is, if people believe in one God and it's not a stone or something, this is going to ruin our livelihood. Okay, so they more or less kicked him out of Mecca, and then he went to Medina and became a military king. So we all know that in the Roman times when Jesus was born, everybody was hoping for a military king. So this was, he became a military king for the people that had not, didn't have a military religious king, so to speak. Obviously, the religious leaders realized that was going to ruin their livelihood, so they kicked him out, and he went to Medina and then became much more militaristic, and then went back and raided Mecca and took it by force. Ultimately, he subjugated the city and brought all of Arabia under his control. Now, there's two major denominations of Islam. The Sunnis, which are basically the Arabs, and they recognize only written traditions and only descendants of Muhammad can preach. Okay, the Shiites, which is basically the Iranians and up in the old Persian area, they recognize the authority of living people. You don't have to be a descendant of Muhammad to preach. And basically, the Iranians and the Arabs have warred for years over these concepts. A lot of people say that's what's going on now, is because the Sunni Arabs were about to make a peace accord with Israel, and the Shiites didn't want that to happen. But we actually had a foreign exchange student for a couple of weeks who was from Tajikistan, which is one of the most godforsaken countries in the world. It's got a border with China. It was one of the old Russian states, okay? And it was at the southeastern corner of Russia, the old Soviet Union, and it has a border with China and a border with Afghanistan, and it's very hilly. And we had this Muslim, he was a Sunni Muslim, very nice young man, went to church with us, was very open to talking about Jesus and all that sort of thing. And it's not what you typically think of as a Muslim being open to Christianity and, going to a Christian church and all that sort of thing. So just like any other religions, there's a wide range of Muslims. But the big thing, the Shiites are more like, if you think the Catholics believe in the Pope, the authority of a living person over the authority of God at times, or Jesus and that sort of thing, that's kind of where the Shiites come out in this thing. But Islam is very dogmatic in many ways. And again, I've talked to Muslims that aren't, but these are all writings from the Quran. God loves you is not in the Quran, okay? And here's the surahs are like the books or the chapters. It says Allah loves not transgressors. If you do something wrong, Allah doesn't love you. Allah loves those who do good, basically only those who do good. Allah loves not those who do wrong. Obey Allah and his messenger. But if they turn away, let them remember that Allah loves not the disbelievers. So it's pretty much, if you do good, Allah likes you. If not, you're in trouble. So again, it's a very works-based religion. It's all about doing the right thing. There's not a whole lot of free will in Islam. It is the most super disciplined of all religions. Those who Allah willeth to guide, he openeth their breath to Islam. Those whom he willeth to leave straying, he maketh their breasts close and constricted as if they had to climb up to the skies. So not a whole lot of free will there. And then in terms of believing in your eternal security, even Muhammad himself didn't know of his eternal security. It says, by Allah, though, and this is Muhammad speaking, though I am an apostle of Allah, yet I do not know what Allah will do to me. So all of these religions are very, you don't know what's going to happen. You got to just kind of trust, and you just got to try and do more good works than bad works. And certainly in Islam, jihad is the only security. And I didn't get it in there very well. It says those who die in battle for Islam more certainly than it promises salvation to anyone. And it says, sorry, this got goofed up there. If you are slain or die in the way of Allah, forgiveness and mercy from Allah are far better than all they could amass. If you are called for fighting, go forth immediately. So again, the only real security is if you die in battle fighting for Allah. Pretty easy to get people to defend you and fight for you when you got them believing that. Okay. And again, Muhammad started in Mecca, didn't get much traction there, so he went to Medina. And the thing about it is his writings in Mecca were very much more kind and peaceful and loving. And those are the ones you hear quoted a lot, you know, especially around here, and people. And then, but then there's the other much more tough sayings. And what it is that Islam has a principle of the abrogator and the abrogated, which to abrogate means to annul by an authoritative act, or to abolish by the authority of a successor, to repeal. Okay, and in several places in the Quran, it talks about the later teachings of Muhammad abrogate the earlier teachings. So if you read it word for word, and I haven't, and I'll give you some references for all this, basically the more peaceful, loving your brother and that sort of thing are in the beginning of the Quran. When Muhammad was at Mecca, then he went to Medina and become much more militaristic, and slay the infidel and that sort of thing. So if somebody's trying to convert somebody to Islam, they basically are using the earlier ones, but in the Quran it says those principles should be abrogated or replaced by the later ones. So when a recent verse in the Quran gives a contradictory view to another verse, the old verse, it renders it null and void. So the fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them, and seize them, beleaguer them, and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. That replaces, in theory, according to this author, the earlier peaceful writings. Now, so I was looking at Wikipedia, and you know, I had this feeling that the thing about, you know, people that do a casual reading of Christianity, they say, well, in the Old Testament, it was brutal. They were killing each other, you know, they were slaying each other, and God was wiping everybody out. But then Jesus came and you had the new covenant. So the things went from bad to good. Okay. Whereas actually in the Quran, due to this theory of abrogation, they went from good to bad. And then I was reading, you know, just researching this in Wikipedia, and it was talking about this abrogation. It says, while most Christian theology reflects the view that at least some Mosaic laws have been set aside under the new covenant, there are some theology systems that view the entire Mosaic or Old Covenant as abrogated, in that all of the Mosaic laws are set aside for the law of Christ. That is total BS. I mean, that's a total misreading of everything. That's in Wikipedia. And it's right in the section that talks about abrogation. So it's kind of like they're like, well, Islam has this idea of abrogation, and the Christian idea is just as bad. So it's fascinating to see that.
This is Debbie, and I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, who does the abrogation in the Quran? I mean, how do changes get made that supersede
Yeah,
what was there before?
the Quran is all the writings of Muhammad, and these are all what he heard from the angel Gabriel. And he wrote some things when he was in Mecca at the beginning, and then he wrote other things when he moved to Medina. So
Okay, so he's the one that his later writings are what abrogate. Okay.
right. And the other interesting thing, if you read deep into it, is one thing about the Bible is that Matthew was a disciple, right?
Yeah.
John was a disciple. Mark, I say, was a cousin or, closely related to Jesus. And then Luke was a doctor so he was more of the objective view. But you have 4 views all within probably 20 to 50 years of Jesus' life that all say the same thing. Technically, if you look at it, the Quran was not actually written. Muhammad lived around 600 AD. The Quran was not written for 100 to 200 years later. So there's no real, that's a long time to translate something. So how all that got jumbled together is not 100% sure, but basically Muhammad, and there's historical writings of him slaughtering hundreds and hundreds of people once he got to Mecca, and then when he went back to overtake, or when he went to Medina, he became more militaristic, and then he went back and captured Mecca by force and ruled all of Arabia or all of that area. So he was a very tyrannical military leader.
Is Allah the same God as our God?
Yeah, in a sense, it's the God of Abraham. Yeah, they believe that, but he's the totally different God. They believe it's the God of Abraham, but he operates totally different. So is it the same God? No.
He doesn't love you.
Right. And he's like a military general, slay the enemy, and you get to heaven. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but then women's rights in Islam. Women, and these are beginning to change now, but traditionally in inheritance, a woman's share was half of a man's. In court, it takes 2 women to equal a man. The wife is considered a possession. You can't touch a woman before praying. Husbands have authority over their wives. Their wife is subject to punishment by the husband. And women have to veil themselves always outside the home. So, and this stuff gets a lot crazier than that if you read deep into that. So, they have a lot of rules.
So he was for sure a descendant of Ishmael?
Yes, they're pretty sure of that. Yes. So he's a violent military leader. I think we've discussed that all pretty well. So again, the Quran promises paradise to those who die in battle for Islam, more certainly than it promises salvation to anyone else. If you slay or die in the way of Allah, forgiveness and mercy from Allah are far better than all they could amass. If you are called for fighting, go forth immediately. That kind of sums up the military religious leader. And these are all books. I'm happy to send this to you if you're interested. This is where a lot of this information came from. Those are the references. So Christianity is very unique, and these are some of the differences. Jesus was God incarnate. He was the only major prophet that claimed to be God. Buddha didn't claim to be God. Muhammad just claimed to write down what he heard from God. And the Hindus have no major prophets. So Jesus was the only one that claimed to be God. He was the only one who was self-identical with his message. The people that wrote the Vedas, and that the wise sayings in both Buddhism and Buddha and the prophets of Hinduism, none of them were self-identical with their message. They just said, do good, do this, do that, but they didn't always live it out. And the big way, a good way I like to categorize the differences. Christianity is the only religion that said what God did to get to mankind, not what mankind must do to get to God. The whole thing about karma and Hinduism, Buddhism, and even Islam is these are all the rules that if you follow these rules, you'll get to God. The whole Christian theology is what God did to help mankind understand how much he loved them. That's a big difference. Jesus of Nazareth, as I have beat to death pretty well, was the first to talk about what?
No pun intended.
Yeah. Where was the pun there? Beat to
Jesus said beat to death.
Oh yeah, okay. Jesus. No, that was not intended. Okay, so forgiven sin, and this whole, the more I read Christianity, Jesus was talking about the spiritual world. The kingdom of God is on earth as it is in heaven. None of these other religions have anything close to that. And certainly the idea of treating all people as equal, and that we were all created equal in God, or creating God's image, and therefore all people are equal. Nobody had anything close to that. And the idea that one person paid the price to redeem everybody to God is just totally different than anything else any of these other religions have. And it's the only religion that has a consistent documented history from beginning to end that goes for 1,500 years. And prophecies. I don't think I have that in there. It's the only one that has prophecies that were fulfilled. It's the only worldview that clearly discusses how the spiritual world and the physical world relate. Buddhism and Hinduism escape from reality. But Jesus said, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He was the reuniting of divinity and humanity. Pagans made sacrifices to their gods. Christians accept the sacrifice their God made for them. And again, Jesus worried about sinful motives, not just sinful actions. Buddhism gets into that a little bit, not quite as clearly as Christianity. And there it is. Christianity, the only religion that includes a series of prophecies that span over 1,500 years. And then simplicity. The thing about Christianity is it gets more simple. It ends up with Jesus saying, there's just two rules: love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and might, and love others as I have loved you. It's sacrificial love. It all kind of gets down to that. There's no eightfold path, no Sharia laws, which are voluminous, and no 1,000 gods of the Hindus. And this is that sheet that I have, and which I'll go into. Yeah, so let's, and if I can stop sharing that, let me bring that sheet up. All right. So see if this brings us up. That didn't work. Hold on a second here. Where is my share down there? Well, anyhow, so we'll just end Debbie, so this is what I sent out
I
yesterday.
have it, Bob. I've got it in front of me. I printed it.
Oh, okay, good. I should have known you would. Let me get that. Okay, let me get back there. So, and this kind of lays it all out that you can see it all together. I'm sorry, I can't get that. But so we talked about the upper half, but the eternal consequences, the afterlife. The three monotheistics believe, well, obviously Christianity and Judaism believe in the God of heaven. For the Muslims, it's paradise, if you fight the battles for Allah. For the Hinduism, it's reincarnation. You keep coming back till you get it right. From the Buddhist, it's release from the material world. And the New Age and the existentialism, it's not even an issue. They're not worried about the everlasting. They're just trying to increase pleasure and decrease pain. So life chances, and this is what the big one about Hinduism. You get many chances in Hinduism. You get actually Buddhism, you get many chances. The more spiritual you become by meditating and do good acts, you can come back several times, but you're trying to escape from the material world. And the farther you get from the material world, the better off you are. Naturalism, you get one life. All these other ones, and certainly existentialism, they're not concerned about anything. No, there is no afterlife. It's just day to day, increased pleasure, decreased pain. So, and Christianity is the only one that salvation is by faith. The existentialists, there is no salvation. They're not worried about that. The number of gods, the Abrahamic tradition is one God. Hinduism is many gods, and for many people, ultimately one God. Buddhism is non-theistic, and then the New Age and stuff, there's really, naturalism, they believe that nature is God. But to me, that's paganism. When you believe that something God created is God and not the God that created it, I call that paganism. Relationship to God, in the early days for Judaism is only priests. It's different than that now, I guess. Christianity is the only one that believes in a personal God that died for you, and that obedience is, this is another big thing from karma. The Christian concept is you do good because you believe in God and you want to please God. Karma is you do good to make up for the bad you did. So Christianity is much more proactive again, in that sense, that you're doing good because you love God, because he said to do it, not because you did something wrong first. Okay, so Hindu is choose your own God. Buddhist is non-theistic, there is no God. And same with the naturalism, secular humanism, they don't believe in a real God. So how to deal with sins? Judaism was all about sacrifice. You sacrifice a lamb, a goat, your grain, whatever. Christianity is love and forgiveness. Islam is works, got to do what Allah says to do. Hinduism, you deal with sins by doing more good works. Buddhism, you deal with sins by withdrawing. I don't have that in there. By withdrawing from the material world. And secular humanism, it is what it is. Forgiveness, again, Judaism was an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And in Islam, there's a thing that your good works or your bad works are like an anchor around your neck. So you never really get away from them. You just have to fight for Allah and you'll be good. At least according to the later ones. There are people that believe in only the early scriptures of Muhammad. So Buddhism, suffering is caused by material attachments. Secular humanism, you try to develop a morality based on reason. And in the naturalism, that's nature is more important than humans, pretty much. Major prophets got there. Buddha is Buddhism, Muhammad is Islam. And then morality, right and wrong. Judaism has the 10 Commandments. Christianity has the 2 Great Commandments. Islam has Sharia law. Eastern Karma has various Vedas and Upanishads and all that. Buddhism has a 12-fold path. And the other ones don't believe, in anything like that. That's pretty much where we end up. Let me see. And I'd end it by saying, the true sense of adventure is looking for God around you. I heard somebody asked Mother Teresa, how do you know you're doing God's will? And she said, well, just look around you and you'll see it and you'll know. And my thing is God created everything. So in your everyday life, keep him in the picture, don't forget that he created everything and he wants to continue to be part of the process. And the big question is all knowledge revealed, or do humans understand things that are not revealed by God? That's a good one to concentrate on. The more and more I think about, you can't have information without intelligence. So there has to be a greater intelligence, and ultimately all knowledge is revealed. Kind of like I talk about God's laws versus human laws. So it's human knowledge versus God's knowledge. Are you, discovering human knowledge, or are you discovering God's knowledge? That's what we got to work for. And I believe there's a lot of prayers waiting to be answered that people never pray. You got to keep God involved in the process. He created everything. Don't try and do it on your own. So I'll leave it at that. Next week we're going to kind of wrap things up. There's a great book by James Sire that I quote in both books, and it shows how consciousness, I talk about the history of human spiritual consciousness starting in the 1600s was, in the Western world was very Christian, pretty much all Christian, and how it step by step it moved to existentialism. So by studying that both on an individual and a social level, it gives you a feel for how people end up as existentialists. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with a general discussion. And the question is, what did you get out of this course? So try and, if there's any salient points, as they say, I'd like you to bring those up next week.
Is next weekend?
Yeah, next week is the last week. Any other questions or anything? Thanks for hanging in there. We went long again.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay,
Our friends
see you,
in
Debbie.
Israel Thursday.
Oh.
We're going through Jordan. How about
Good. Yeah.
So, yeah. a good thing.
I gotta believe they're trying to get everybody out of there.
Oh, yeah. Well, Hezbollah is gonna come from the north too, so.
Yeah, it's gonna be horrible.
And I'm not sure I'd wanna go down through Tel Aviv anyway. It's closer to Gaza.
Well, that's why they closed the airport, because they were